Good evening. I'm about to read aloud from this book titled Making Moral Judgments: Psychological Perspectives on Morality, Ethics, and Decision Making. This book is by Donaldson Forsythe. I've had this book for some time, since 2020, I guess, and it's a free book that you can get on Google Books. But I haven't really had the chance to read it as I would like, and I really haven't put much effort toward reading the book. When I first read the book, I started having this thought about the word good and the word evil. Now, many people may disagree, and it's perfectly normal to disagree with the opinion another person has formed, especially when it comes to language, because we all speak the way we want to speak, or we speak the way we're indoctrinated to speak, which um, guides our thinking. Anyway, there is somewhere in the book the word good and the word evil. And I guess to discern between good and evil, or whatever word you want to use to go over what it is to be good and what it is to be evil. You think of evil, you think of bad. You think of good, you think of uh, other things. Anyway, I feel like the language, English, I guess, has, there's many different ways of looking at things. And as an agnostic person, someone who thinks of himself as agnostic, who would like to think of himself as apologetically agnostic, especially about the language, thinking of myself as a logophile. The word devil, devil, and the word evil, instead of good and evil, I'd like to use the word devil, like a like something that is less evil, to something of an attempt to lessen what is evil. But we have so much diversity here in the United States, in America, in the world, that it's difficult to say something like that and really believe it. But if you're someone who's read the Bible, then I I think that my making this statement that devil is the true uh, lessening to evil, understanding that there are things to say that are good, there are things to say that are bad. To me, I think of good as not bad. I think of good as the informal, which is not bad. I understand that there are things we like and things we may dislike. But because we dislike something, that doesn't make it evil. And because we like something, that doesn't make it entirely good. We can like things that are not good for us when it comes to matters of time and matters of fact. So every attempt I can make to say these words are my own. That's what this video is about, expressing a creativity in video format. Obviously, I didn't create the devices I'm using, and I didn't create the platforms to put it on, but to act or behave in a way that is original, genuine. These days, it's a matter of trying. Here I am having to use the word matter. So I have here a split screen where making moral judgments, psychological perspectives on morality, ethics, and decision making by Donaldson R. Forsyth, published by Routledge, which is Creative Commons. I'm going to go over it, and there may be something I would like to say in doing that. I'm going to read it aloud. I'm trying to get to the point of the video, which is the reading aloud, but I do want to express myself in my own words what this book I think has taught me. And it's part of why I want to read the Bible, or why I wanted to read the Bible, which I did in 2024. I made sure to go over a 1-year Bible for men using the KJV format. But that, I think just because I've made it through every page of the Bible and looked over every word, there's still more studying that I would like to do in 2026. It's just getting around, or waiting for 2026 to get here is the thing. So it just so happens, this being December 31st, 2025, what's going on right now? Why, or what happened before I read the Bible that made me feel I should read the Bible? Especially the word good and the word evil, the word devil and the word evil, DEVIL, and evil, knowing that D can mean to de-escalate, like the word de-escalate, de-escalating evil being what devil does, and only evil can devil de-escalate. But to de-escalate evil, that also would mean to make things that are immoral seem moral. It's like the verse in the Bible that speaks of, or that says, to make good seem evil and evil seem good. It is something to talk about, but it's difficult to talk about that. Yeah, I have to be, or it's who I am, agnostic. That agnosticism isn't exactly a religion, it's just it's a way of being, it's our personality. And it's scary to talk that way. And if not for having the freedom of speech, as we have here in America, in the United States, I wouldn't be saying this. So let me begin. Making moral judgments, psychological perspectives on morality, ethics, and decision making. This fascinating new book examines diversity in moral judgments. drawing on recent work in social, personality, and evolutionary psychology, reviewing the factors that influence the moral judgments people make. Why do reasonable people so often disagree when drawing distinctions between what is morally right and wrong? Even when individuals agree in their moral pronouncements, they may employ different standards, different comparative processes, or entirely disparate criteria in their judgments. Examining the sources of this variety, the author expertly explores morality using ethics position theory alongside other theoretical perspectives in moral psychology, and shows how it can relate to contemporary social issues from abortion to premarital sex to human rights. Also featuring a chapter on applied context, using the theory of ethics positions to gain insights into the moral choices and actions of individuals, groups, and organizations in educational research, political, medical, and business settings. The book offers answers that apply across individuals, communities, and cultures. Investigating the relationship between people's personal moral philosophies and their ethical thoughts, emotions, and actions, this is fascinating reading for students and academics from psychology and philosophy, and anyone interested in morality and ethics. Donaldson Forsyth is a social and personality psychologist who studies groups, leadership, ethical thought, and the psychological basis of teaching and learning. He is a professor at the University of Richmond, U.S., where he holds the Colonel Leo K. and Gailey Thorsness Endowed Chair in Ethical Leadership. He has authored or edited 10 books, including Group Dynamics, now in its 7th edition, and over 140 chapters and articles on ethics, groups, and related topics. He was recognized as the outstanding group psychologist by the American Psychological Association in 1996 and received the State of Virginia Outstanding Faculty Award in 2002. Having said that, or having read that, I want to say that I've listened to a couple of audiobooks, and I haven't read many books in my entire life. And I've been trying over the years, especially since 2020 or 2019 to now, to read aloud articles and read things aloud. And, in my free time, try to read things silently. But I find that reading aloud and reading on camera, it's easier to do that. And I don't think of myself as the most creative person, but creating content and treating books as something to interact with, I think I can manage that. And that's what I'm attempting to do. It's not not the most creative thing. It's just something that's there to do that I think other people may like to do, no matter the language they speak. Just, to sit in front of your camera and say something or talk about reading something. And it's difficult to do this. You need time to do it. It's not something you can just do. And it takes the free time. I can't do this while I'm working, but sometimes I just up and do it. It being a holiday seems fitting, I guess, especially for the next year coming. I want to be totally focused on reading the Bible. I'd like to get at least this first chapter about the following chapters, and everything out of the way. So I feel like I've said about enough, but why I have my phone here, it's another important thing. Why I have it here is so I can Google if I need to Google. And what I would like to Google first is, what is it called? Ethics. Ethics positions theory. Ethics position theory. I'm doing this while I have the second video uploading, and I'm trying to get those videos shared in a timely manner and get them created in a timely manner. And I don't want to spend too much time doing them, but this third video, I guess a third take, I may not be able to get it posted until tomorrow. So here goes. And I don't know how long it's going to be, how long it's going to take me, because I want this to be the entire first chapter, if possible. But ethics position theory, EPT, suggests that individual moral judgments stem from two core dimensions: idealism, concern for positive outcomes, avoiding harm, and relativism, belief in situational, not universal, moral rules. People fall into four main ethical positions: absolutism, subjectivism, exceptionism, and situationism. Based on their high, low scores on these scales, influencing how they react to ethical dilemmas, particularly in business and research. And this is the AI overview. The two dimensions, idealism, how strongly one believes that actions should not harm others and that positive outcomes are paramount, even if it means balancing potential good against potential harm. Relativism, the degree to which one believes morality depends on the situation, culture, or individual, rather than universal fixed principles. And that's like I'm saying about evil, the word evil and the word devil. I can understand why one would see the devil or see the word devil as evil, but I don't. I think nothing is more evil than giving devil the giving devil to Satan, right? We don't want Satan to be the devil. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't want to think of Satan as the devil, as this person who has taken the name devil. I would think of using devil as a name for Satan as evil. And that's the way I'm acting here. The four ethics positions, EPQ categories: absolutism, high idealism, low relativism, believes in strict, universal moral rules that always apply. Subjectivism, high relativism, low idealism, morality is personal, consequences matter more than rules. Situationism, high relativism, high idealism, focuses on specific situations and outcomes, but still values avoiding harm. Exceptionism, low idealism, low relativism, willing to make exceptions to rules for good outcomes, can seem pragmatic or self-serving. Key applications: understanding behavior, explains why people react differently to unethical behavior. why some strongly condemn a lie while others see it as situational. Cross-cultural studies shows how national cultures vary in these moral orientations, influencing business ethics and regulation. Workplace ethics helps predict responses to workplace dilemmas and impacts relationships. So then in the AI overview, there's a article titled A Theory of Ethics Positions, and it is by Donaldson R. Forsyth. But that's not what we're going over today, or that's not what I'm trying to go over today. So getting ethics position theory out of the way and what it is, what else can I look at here in the beginning? I don't think there's anything else I need to go over here for myself. I feel like I have a good understanding of what that said. So let's go making moral judgments, psychological perspectives on morality, ethics, and decision making, Donaldson R. Forsyth. Published 2020 by Routledge. Routledge is an imprint of the Taylor and Francis Group and Informa Business. The right of Donaldson R. Forsyth to be identified as the author of this work has been asserted by him in accordance with Section 77 and 78 of the Copyright Designs and Patents Act, 1988. The open access version of this book, available at www.taylorfrancis.com, has been made available under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 license. Trademark notice. Product or corporate names may be trademarks or registered trademarks and are used only for identification and explanation without intent to infringe. Typeset in Bambo by Apex Covantage LLC. This book and the research that it summarizes would not have been possible if not for the support provided to the Jepson School of Leadership Studies and the University of Richmond by Barbara and Thomas Matthews. The Matthews endowed the Colonel Leo K. and Gay Lee Thorsness Chair in Ethical Leadership to honor the civic work and the moral principles of Colonel Thorsness and his wife, Gay Lee. Colonel Thorsness received the Medal of Honor for his actions in the Vietnam War for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. He was the most ethically honorable man I have ever met. By way of expressing my deep gratitude, I am dedicating this book to Barbara and Thomas Matthews, Leo and Gayle Thorsness, and their families. I'm sure that was by Donaldson R. Forsyth. But what is intrepidity? Intrepidity. Intrepidity is the noun form of intrepid, meaning the quality of being fearless, bold, daring, and resolutely courageous, especially when facing danger, the unknown, or difficulty, like a great explorer or soldier. It signifies a strong spirit, bravery, and a lack of alarm or timidity, with synonyms like valor, dauntlessness, and fortitude, and antonyms like timidity or cowardice. Nice. Contents. Let's go with the acknowledgments. Why do reasonable people so often disagree when drawing distinctions between what is morally right and wrong? Some people, but not others, oppose the death penalty. Some believe that any action that benefits them personally is allowable, whereas others base their moral appraisals on a more egalitarian code code of ethics. There are those that strive each day to help others, but there are others who consider time spent in service to others to be time wasted. Why do the citizens of some nations embrace one set of moral beliefs and vilify the standards and practices common elsewhere in the world? This book examines the sources of this diversity in moral judgments, drawing on recent work in social, personality, and evolutionary psychology. But none of the insights it offers would have been possible if not for the work of the many researchers who have diligently investigated moral judgment in general and individual differences in moral positions specifically. People like Rick Berger, Joan Ciulia, Carl Kelly, Mike McDaniel, Judy Nye, Ray Pope, Bill Scott, and Betsy Singh. All deserve my thanks, although none should be held accountable for the portions of the book that are ill-considered or misguided. They did all they could to prevent me from making mistakes along the way. 4 of my colleagues deserve special thanks. Barry Shelkner used his intellect, insight, and research prowess to launch our initial investigations into individual differences in moral outlook. Bob Giacalone encouraged me to consider the implications of my largely theoretical work for business contexts, a shift that dramatically increased the theory's scope. Terry Price shared his vast knowledge of moral philosophy with me. He identified and corrected the many mistakes I made when I waded into the realm of moral philosophy. Ernest O'Boyle collaborated with me on many of the studies described in the pages of this book, and he is the reason these projects were so successful. Since his intellect is matched by his scientific drive, he is a continual source of ideas, insights, and inspiration. When in this book, I write that we examined this process, or we discovered that, the we is usually me and Ernest. Without his support, initiative, and quantitative skills, this book would not have been written. I wish to also thank Ravi Iyer and Jonathan Haidt, the coordinators of yourmorals.org, for including the Ethics Position Questionnaire, EPQ, on the site and for sharing the data de-identified they collected with me. The yourmorals.org research group includes Peter Ditto, Jesse Graham, Jonathan Haidt, Ravi Iyer, Sina Koleva, Matt Motil, Gary Sherman, and Sean Wojcik. There are those, too, who helped me deal with the process of turning the words in my computer files into a finished book. They include Cassie Price, Susan Taylor, and Dean Sandra Pert in the Jepson School of Leadership at the University of Richmond, and Eleanor Reedy and the editorial production team at Taylor and Francis. Their support was essential at each step along the way from the book's initial conception to the final printed product. Last, but of course not least, I wish to thank my ever-supportive wife, Claire, who so often helps me think through my ill-formed ideas and half-baked insights. Writing this particular book was, after all, her idea. Donaldson R. Forsyth, Montebello, West Virginia. Montebello, Virginia. I'm from West Virginia. Excuse me. Terrible. All right, so here goes. That took almost all of 30 minutes, the opening, the saying myself something. Now I'm on to the first chapter titled Judging Morality. And in this video, I plan to do no more than read the first chapter. And then if I ever intend to go any further than this first chapter, I'm going to have to figure out a way to present that. But I've had this book for years, and I always think it would be nice to get around to trying to read that. And here it is, the New Year's Eve of 2025, and it's just what I'm doing. I have a cup of coffee, which I had a cup this size earlier. I haven't drank this entire cup. And, I'm feeling a little weird about it, but, I'm unashamed of my ability to read, but it's the thing about getting around to doing it and actually putting the time and effort into it that is difficult. And again, if not for being on record and reading it aloud, I may never read it. And even though it's only this first chapter, there's still a lot to go over here. Voice practice being one thing, or one of the most important things. Like I feel like I need to be talking more often because I don't have many conversations with people. And I need to be reading and reading aloud to practice using my voice, to learn new words and how to use them, to see the way the sentences and paragraphs are structured, all of those things. So I'm doing several things at once right here. But not every word I say is my own, and then I have these beliefs that are not fully, um, they're not fully formed, and I use but the first chapter, the first couple of chapters, I guess, of this book to say that I really need to read the Bible. That's why I'm reading the Bible. That's why I want to use the Bible, is because of this book. But I have some thoughts about that as well. The work of translation, the work of format. This book is formatted differently than any Bible that I've ever seen. The 1 Year Bible for Men, you read you read from the Old Testament, then you read from the New Testament, then you read a psalm, and then you read Psalms, and then you read Proverbs. And then there's a devotional in there. This is the second one of these I purchased. In the last one, or in my previous one, I kept writing the date and time, and I got a little upset about that, so I bought another one. I also have a chronological Bible, but reading the Bible for 15 minutes a day for an entire year, it's worth trying, but trying being a word, that means you're doing something difficult. It's trying to do something. You have to try to do it, and to try, there may be more things that you have to do according to your reading and language comprehension, and the time you have. It says give it 15 minutes a day, and yeah, that's okay, but sitting around for 15 minutes and what, waking up early enough to do it, or staying up late enough to do it, and then making sure that you're not overly caffeinated, or making sure that you're not, you want to be as clear headed as possible. And even and being clear headed, that may mean you're not feeling well and things of that. So, to get up and read the words and think about the words we're reading, it matters if you have caffeine or not. Little things like that I've been thinking about. And 15 minutes is a lot of time, especially if you're someone who works out or tries to work out, because 15 minutes can be an entire workout. And you're giving the time sacrifice, which in the Bible it says somewhere in there, in some way, that time sacrifices are not, that your time sacrifices don't matter. I mean, they do humanly, but that you feel you're sacrificing time for this, like you're sacrificing other things. However, we think of sacrifice when it comes to matters of time and matters of fact, humanly, not otherworldly. We're not actually sacrificing anything. Receiving, we are receiving something, right? We're not sacrificing, we are receiving, but we might believe we're sacrificing at first. And here earlier, I said that there are words that I may stumble over in reading. And, the thing about stumbling blocks when it comes to words, looking at things from a wordly word point of view, the word we stumble over, we need to know what it means. Now, again, I'm trying to get through to begin the first chapter, and this video may run a lot longer than I would like. If it runs long, it's going to take a while to upload. But a word I've been looking at is deception. And I have an AI overview for deception that I've shared on social media. The specific word deception itself appears sparingly, but related words like deceit, deceive, deceiver, and their variations occur over 100 times in the Bible, with some estimates putting the total usage of these terms around 163 times across different versions, emphasizing its pervasive theme of spiritual and moral falsehood. For instance, deceit appears around 34 times and deceive and its forms over 70 times in the KJV. So, about the word devil and the word evil, the word good and the word evil, even the word love and the word live, I associate love with live as if live and love are the same thing. That, associating live, love, and life with the exact same thing. And using the word deceit, deceive, and deceiver to express that. Because there is something about expression. What cannot be expressed in words, and that actions speak louder than words, if at all that's true, there must be something that cannot be expressed even in action or it can't be intended to, like we cannot intend to express it, and it cannot unintentionally be expressed either. There is something that is unexpressible. But when it comes to language, being a logophile, practicing logophilia, I guess. That's another word that I've Googled before I begin here. Google the word logophilia. The AI overview says a deep love or fascination with words, their origins, etymology, meanings, and usage, often leading to enjoyment in reading, writing, vocabulary building, and playing with language. Logophile being a person who has this passion. It's more than just liking words, it's a profound connection, celebrating language's power and beauty, sometimes leading to creating new words or exploring linguistic concepts deeply. Now, I found this word in a book that is titled 30 Days to a More Powerful Vocabulary. And the word is satiated. And I shared that yesterday because I was thinking about not letting people know you're hungry. And when I Googled that, it gave me something about neurodivergence and eating disorders. But what I meant was to have already ate before being in the presence of one another, or, you know, to not to have not eaten and acting like you have ate. It doesn't matter because there's such a thing as fasting. But to let someone know you're hungry, that's really nothing to talk about. But we talk about it. It's not bad to talk about these things. Today I ate a cup of soup. I'm having coffee with skim milk inside, or low fat milk, zero fat milk in it. So I have a cup of soup, I have some mustard, and I have some milk in my coffee. That's what I've had today. But I eat enough to consider myself in that way satiated. And satiated, according to Google, means being filled or satisfied to the fullest extent, often to the point of having had enough or even too much, especially concerning hunger, desire, or appetite, leaving no room for more. It implies complete gratification, like feeling full after a big meal or content after fulfilling a deep need. Key aspects: fullness, feeling physically full from food or drink, beyond just being not hungry. Satisfaction, complete fulfillment of a craving, desire, or need, whether for food, pleasure, or even information. Excess, sometimes, can imply being supplied so much that it leads to weariness or disgust, like being surfeited. Surfeited. Examples: after the feast, everyone left the table feeling satiated. Her thirst was finally satiated. He couldn't be satiated with praise. He always wanted more. Now, after seeing the word fullness there, I thought to Google fullness of, and that's when I shared logophilia as the description for why I shared fullness of, or searched fullness of to share. Fullness of usually refers to in the fullness of time, meaning eventually or at the perfect moment in God's plan, like Jesus's arrival, or filled with the fullness of God. A Christian concept of being completely infused with God's presence, character, and power achieved through union with Christ, leading to spiritual completeness and overflowing love. It signifies ultimate satisfaction, purpose, and readiness. Going beyond just existing to being completely equipped and alive in faith, a state accessible now, not just in heaven. So I have some things I feel like I need to say when I use certain words, or when I come across certain words. I feel like, just because I know how to use a word, that using it in other ways is important in our freedoms of speech, especially the First Amendment. But always, when you think about the First Amendment, why the Second Amendment is so important. You don't want people to be mad at you for having an opinion, because people like communicating. But I see communication as, communication is very intimate, or it can be intimate. I'm not talking to anyone specifically at this moment, but I'm talking, I'm attempting to make communication. It's an attempt to communicate in some way. But, you see two people talking, and that could be a form of intimacy. The way divorce works. I say divorce because my parents, they have divorced. They divorced when I was 7 years old, after having two children. Or when I was 5, 6, 7. I don't remember which age I was exactly when they divorced. Because when you're a child, time moves very slowly. When you get older, time starts to move faster. But anyway, they divorced after having two children. So they one day had to meet. And when they met, they were communicating or conversating. And when I was younger, I seen there was puzzles on the wall, and we had a room, we had beds. So they've had to talk about these things some way, and that's what they were talking about. We used to have breakfast, we were trying to go to church, but that's only in my very childhood years. And then they separate. So they stopped communicating. And that's that. But let me move on, because I've been going on here for nearly 50 minutes. I'm 48 minutes in right now, and we're going on with chapter 1 of Making Moral Judgments, Psychological Perspectives on Morality, Ethics, and Decision Making. Chapter 1 is titled Judging Morality. The elementary forces in ethics are probably as plural as those of physics are. The various ideals have no common character apart from the fact that they are ideals. William James, 1897, 1979. Moral judgments are the most significant social inferences people make about others and themselves. Those who are judged to be immoral are not just thought to be mistaken or misguided, but unacceptable in a fundamental way. Corrupt, untrustworthy, malevolent, and possibly even evil. Moral philosophers detailed conceptual analysis of the nature of these judgments, along with psychologists' more recent empirical studies. Let's try that one more time. I got to thinking when I seen the word evil there that maybe I forgot to say that it's good to consider everything evil. We have everything there is, and that there is an evil to it. So I have a lot of issues reading this book because I'm a very agnostic type of person. Let me try this again. Moral judgments are the most significant social inferences people make about others and themselves. Those who are judged to be immoral are not just thought to be mistaken or misguided, but unacceptable in a fundamental way, corrupt, untrustworthy, malevolent, and possibly even evil. Moral philosophers' detailed conceptual analysis of the nature of these judgments, along with psychologists' more recent empirical studies, suggests that moral judgments are reserved for particularly offensive actions, those that cause harm to others and are inconsistent with standards that, in the given social setting, demarcate the morally good and the morally bad. Yet, despite the critical importance of morality for maintaining stable interpersonal relationships in human societies, disagreement over what is moral and what is immoral is as likely as complete moral consensus. Many factors contribute to this diversity, but among them are differences in each person's ethics position, their personal moral philosophy regarding actions that cause others harm, idealism, and their stance with regard to the universality of moral standards, relativism. What will the 7.5 billion people on the planet Earth do today? Some will work, toil at their tasks. Some will relax, vacationing with family and friends. Some will sleep the day away. Others will exercise diligently, and some will study, cook dinner, or join with others in shared pursuits. But some will do things that differ from these routine, day to day activities. Some will save others' lives. Some will donate their time to worthy causes. Some will spend another day working to make their community a better place. And then there are the others who commit actions that are socially untoward, from the bigot who insults someone in a despised outgroup, the philandering husband who cheats on his wife of 20 years, the accountant who looks the other way when the boss asks him to obscure the company's losses, to the thief, the rapist, the molester, and the murderer. On any given day, people will do things that are judged as commendable, good, fair, just, and moral, but they will also do things that earn them moral condemnation. They and their actions will be considered bad, unfair, unjust, and wrong. These moral judgments, like other types of valuations, range along a continuum from positive to negative. But unlike judgments of a person's social skills, coordination, conscientiousness, and so on, moral judgments are perceptually and interpersonally persistent, and their effects are far reaching. They are not merely monetary inclinations or personal preferences, but socially significant inferences that determine our understanding of ourselves, other people, and our most significant interactions and relationships. Since those who act in ways that others consider to be immoral are often met with negative sanctions, people must be able to predict how others are going to evaluate the things they do if they wish to avoid such sanctions. A pattern of conflict-free interaction implies that we are able to restrict our behaviors so that they do not conflict too greatly with society's conception of morality, and that those around us are similarly so self-regulated, and that those around us are similarly so self-regulated. Moral judgments also make the future seem more predictable, as we expect that those who act ethically today can be trusted to act that way tomorrow. A case could be made that moral judgments are the most significant social inferences people formulate about others and about themselves. This book examines the making of moral judgments, but with a focus on one puzzling aspect of these judgments, their diversity. Philosophers have been examining matters of morality for thousands of years, yet they continue to disagree when discussing what makes something morally right rather than wrong. Socrates believed that morality and wisdom are so closely associated that virtuous action flows effortlessly from knowledge, but Aristotle demurred by suggesting virtue is manifested in one's actions. Hume made the case that morality is more a matter of emotion and sentiment than reason and rationality, but Bentham considered morality to be a question of utility. Does the action promote or interfere with happiness? Kant, in contrast to all, believed that intentions separated out the good and bad, for goodwill matters absolutely, whereas good effects count for nothing when it comes to morality. These divergences in moral conceptions are not unique to philosophers. Humans have a tendency to drift toward conformity and agreement, yet any two people's moral appraisals of the very same act in clearly defined circumstances can spin off into different directions. Certainly, some actions receive nearly universal commendation, and condemnation, altruistic, self-sacrificing acts, for example, or actions that are done to intentionally harm innocents. But this consensus is lost when the discussion turns to less clear-cut issues. The person who dismisses a small harm done to achieve greater good runs afoul of the person who condemns anyone who causes suffering. Some are certain that lies serve a positive purpose. White lies are ethically allowed, but others say any and all lies are immoral. For every person who publicly announces a moral claim about some contemporary social issue, such as abortion, gay marriage, and universal health care, is another person who takes an opposing view. Even when individuals agree in their moral pronouncements, they may employ different standards, different comparative processes, or entirely disparate criteria in their judgments. Given that moral judgments significantly influence our perceptions of one another, our choices in morally charged situations and the interpersonal processes that sustain adaptive, healthy social relationships, this diversity in moral thought is puzzling. So let me do that one more time, that last sentence there. Given that moral judgments significantly influence our perceptions of one another, our choices in morally charged situations and the interpersonal processes that sustain adaptive, healthy social relationships, this diversity in moral thought is puzzling. Part of what I'm doing is practicing the way the sentence is structured and reading it. And I want to make sure that I sound how it should sound, right? I need to know that there's a question. When I get to a question, I need to know that there may be a question there. So reading ahead is something I haven't done. And I feel like it's important, again, that I express this. And I would one day like to get over having to express this, but practice is the problem. I need to practice if I want to get better at doing this. This book reviews the factors that influence the moral judgments people make, with a particular emphasis on the impact of individual differences in ethical ideologies people adopt on their inferences about morality. This chapter introduces the introduces that analysis by first examining the defining features of moral judgments and their implications. What distinguishes such judgments from the many other inferences about people's traits, tendencies, strengths, and weaknesses? And what psychological and interpersonal purposes do these judgments serve? So, reading that chapter, that's fine, but here's where I can't really say much about what I've just read. And that, to me, is a little bit of a problem. But it's not that I need to remember what is stated. Nobody's asking me any questions about what I'm reading. And I haven't made up any questions before I create my video. My video is me trying to figure out how to hold my mouth, how to sit here for the long period of time it takes using my voice on record or on record, possibly stumbling over a word and needing to look at it. Now, there's a word I notice that I've stumbled over or stumbled upon, and it's demurred, demurred, raised doubts or objections or show reluctance. Now, from earlier, I think it's in this. Let me see. Yeah, circumspect. Earlier, I came across the word circumspect when reading this, and I felt odd about the definition of it. Circumspect. The definition of circumspect, now I'm about to use the word as I read aloud. Wary and unwilling to take risks. The officials were very circumspect in their statements. I don't like that that is what circumspect means. Now, circumspectly, the definition of circumspectly, to act circumspectly means to behave in a very careful, cautious, and prudent way, looking at all sides and potential consequences before acting or speaking to avoid risks or mistakes. I'm wondering why, in English, circumspectly means to behave in a very careful, cautious, and prudent way. Why does it have that? And why doesn't it just say looking at all sides and potential consequences before acting or speaking to avoid risks or mistakes? Circumspectly, looking at things from all sides. Why does that have to be careful? Why is that considered careful? It implies thorough consideration, discretion, and watchfulness, like someone looking all around before stepping. Circumspect. The meaning of circumspect is careful to consider all circumstances and possible consequences. I don't know if I can believe that it has to do with being careful. I don't know why that is considered being careful and cautious to look at things circumspectly. Anyway, in chapter 1, the first subsection of chapter 1 is moral inferences. And inferences, I should remind myself, practicing repetition right now. Inferences is a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. the process of inferring something. Researchers are entrusted with drawing inferences from the data, a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. Inferences. And disposition. A person's inherent qualities of mind and character. I wonder if it says disposition because every person's inherent qualities of mind and character could be different. Dis, like disproportionate, too large or too small in comparison with something else, like disposition. We are up here on something while others are down here on something, but we are down here on something while others are up here on something. Disposition, disproportionate position, something like that. But anyway, we are all psychologists of a sort, for whenever we encounter other people, we set to work deciphering them. We do not passively observe those around us, but instead actively scrutinize others' actions, drawing inferences about their dispositional tendencies, their preferences and attitudes, and their intentions and designs. When we meet other people, we intuitively gather the data we need to make these inferences. We appraise their appearance, their gestures, their words, and their actions. As Heider stated in his classic work, The Psychology of Interpersonal Relations, the ordinary person has a great and profound understanding of himself and of other people, which through unformulated and only vaguely conceived, which though unformulated and only vaguely conceived, enables him to interact with others in a more or less adaptive way. I have done that twice. Let me try that again. We appraise their appearance, their gestures, their words, and their actions. As Heider stated in his classic work, 1958, The Psychology of Interpersonal Relations, the ordinary person has a great and profound understanding of himself and of other people, which, though unformulated and only vaguely conceived, enables him to interact with others in more or less adaptive ways. Many of these inferences about other people pertain to their basic traits, skills, competencies, moods, interests, and values. But some go deeper. They speak not to surface level, transitory attributes of the individual, but something more basic, more fundamental. Listening to a friend explain how she impressed her boss at work by misleading him about the quality of her work product, we may conclude she is clever, resourceful, and successful, but that she is also a person who cannot be trusted to always tell the truth. When we hear about a firefighter who intervened to save a child stranded in a burning building, we may admire his courage and dedication, but also perceptually promote him into a select group of those we admire for their distinctive moral pureness, the morally advanced exemplars. When we see parents spank their misbehaving child at the mall, we not only draw inferences about their parenting skills and their control of their tempers, but we may also question their ethics. Is it ever justified to physically harm a defenseless minor who you are charged to nurture and protect? These construals are more than detached descriptions of individuals' qualities and the actions they performed. They are moral judgments, evaluative appraisals of the goodness, rightness, and propriety of individuals and their actions. These judgments are not just evaluative, but profoundly evaluative. An immoral person is not just objectionable or unsavory, but wicked or evil. And a person judged to be moral is not just nice or fun to be with, but saintly or virtuous. Moral judgments also tend to be more definitive than opinions, preferences, or other more circumspect inferences. People are generally quite confident when they express their conclusions about morality, even though these judgments are often systematically biased ones. Morality is, more often than not, in the eye of the beholder. Oh. Moral judgments are profoundly evaluative. To be considered inept, good-natured, inconsiderate, wise, or lazy is one thing, but these perceptual inferences pale in their social and psychological impact in comparison to judgments of ethicality. Moral judgments are not tepid, wishy-washy appraisals, but strongly valenced pronouncements of worth and approval or condemnation and disapproval. Words associated with morality are uniquely evaluative, as Anderson, 1968, discovered in his analysis of 555 words that people use to describe other people. When he asked 100 people to rate the words on a scale from least favorable or desirable to most favorable or desirable, words pertaining to morality tended to cluster at the extremes. Such qualities as mature, warm, earnest, kind, friendly, happy, and clean were rated positively, but significantly lower than words that signaled morality. Sincere, honest, loyal, truthful, honorable, and trustworthy. Conversely, negative, socially objectionable qualities, including self-conceit, hard-hearted, prejudiced, irresponsible, unpleasant, impolite, and crude, were rated very negatively, but not as negatively as the words on the list that signaled immorality. Insincere, unkind, untrustworthy, deceitful, dishonorable, malicious, untruthful, dishonest, phony, and a liar. Anderson also asked respondents to rate each word for meaningfulness, positive, negative, and relatively neutral words. Cautious, innocent, inoffensive, nonchalant, self-contented were rated as similar in meaningfulness. Words indicating morality and immorality, in contrast, were rated as significantly more meaningful compared to the more neutral words. Variance in the ratings of the words was also significantly less for moral and immoral attributes relative to negative and neutral qualities. Morally good and bad actions garner more extreme appraisals because they are relatively unusual, and so they violate people's expectations. As expectancy theory suggests, characteristics or actions that perceivers consider to be highly unusual generate, in most cases, a more extreme evaluation. Although moral behaviors such as honesty, self-sacrifice, and compassion are socially desired qualities, they are more rarely observed than more common qualities such as friendliness, self-indulgence, and impatience. Those who are unfailingly truthful or act to help others violate base rates, and so their salient and unexpected acts trigger a more extreme and positive evaluation. In contrast, actions that are roundly condemned, if identified, are, fortunately, also rarer than more quotidian types of activities. These negative but unexpected qualities thus trigger an extreme evaluation, albeit one that is negative rather than positive. So there's another word here that I want to go over personally, and it's meaningfulness or meaning, the meaning of that word. What is the meaning of meaning? Meaning. As a noun, what is meant by a word, text, concept, or action? As an adjective, intended to communicate something that is not directly expressed. Also as a noun, implied or explicit significance, important or worthwhile quality, purpose. That's the meaning of meaning, according to Google. Now, under meaning, there is the word mean, intended to convey, indicate, or refer to a particular thing or notion, signify. Of a word, have something as its signification in the same language or its equivalent in another language. Genuinely intend to convey or express something. Be of some specified importance to someone, especially as a source of benefit or object of affection. Second definition, intend something to occur or be the case. Be supposed or intended to do something. Design or destined for a particular purpose. Have as a motive or excuse in explanation. Have as a consequence or result. Necessarily or usually entail or involve. And that is the definition of mean. Now, I think of mean, I think of rude, I think of, in other words, mean is rude. And if one were meaning, that would be the act of what is mean, to be in the act of mean. But there's another word that mean is not. Mean is not bemean. Bemean is an archaic verb meaning to lower, debase, or demean oneself or something else. Often used reflexively, and signifying making something base or ignoble. It is essentially a more formal or older way of saying to lower someone's dignity or worth. The meaning of bemean, to make mean, to debase, to lower in dignity or character. Usage, most often used reflexively, like he would not bemean himself. Origin, entered English in the mid-1600s, combining the prefix be with mean, as in base or lowly. Synonyms, demean, abase, degrade, humiliate, mortify. Now, the Bible has been around for a long time. And the translation of it, the figuring out the meaning of the words in the Bible, that's what I'm associating with the word meaning. And when you talk about the word meaning, what the word means isn't intended to bemean someone or something or oneself. Now, the next subsection in chapter 1, moral judgments are inferences. The word judgment is usually applied to people's appraisals of morality, suggesting that these construals are different in some way from other types of interpersonal inferences and appraisals. In everyday talk, people do not say they estimate, perceive, take in, or appreciate another person's moral goodness or badness. They judge that a person's morality. Oh, they judge that person's morality. Calling these psychological assessments judgments suggests that they have more in common with a magistrate's objective ruling or decree rather than a person's idiosyncratic opinion or preference. Moral judgments, more so than other inferences, are thought to be transpersonal. It makes no matter who the individuals involved are, the judgment should apply across persons. It makes no matter who the individuals involved are, the judgment should apply across persons. Moreover, as judgments rather than opinions or estimates, they are often considered to be more matters of fact rather than matters of personal preference. As Smith, in his analysis of the relationship between dehumanization and collective aggression, explains, when a person sincerely judges that an act is morally wrong, this entails that they want to avoid it and that they believe everyone else should avoid it too. As with a judge's decision, individuals often express their moral judgments with a relatively high degree of definitiveness. Those who dislike the color beige likely recognize that this preference is a matter of taste, but those who consider an action such as abortion, cheating, or stealing to be morally wrong are less likely to feel these pronouncements are a matter of opinion. As the philosopher Frank Chapman Sharp writes, from the uniformity and immediacy of the moral judgment follows directly its certainty, the sense of necessity, untroubled by a single doubt. The word judgment also suggests that people's inferences about morality are based on their rational review of all available evidence. Moral philosophers such as Socrates, Kant, and Bentham argued over most aspects of morality, but they generally agreed that people make moral judgments through rational reflection. Socrates, for example, reduced moral virtues to knowledge and did away with the non-rational part of the soul, feelings, and character. Kant concluded, the preeminent good which we call moral can therefore consist in nothing else than the conception of law in itself, which certainly is only possible in a rational being. And Bentham's felicific calculus requires considerable cognitive bookkeeping, for one must carefully estimate the nature of the pain and pleasure an action will likely produce, intensity, duration, purity, and then take the balance, which, if on the side of pleasure, will give the general good tendency of the act, if on the side of pain, the general evil tendency. Many psychologists, too, assume moral judgments are guided by the same basic psychological processes that determine decision-making in general. Dewey, 1922, in his analysis of character and conduct, maintained that the moral is to develop conscientiousness, ability to judge the significance of what we are doing and to use that judgment in directing what we do. by fostering those impulses and habits which experience has shown to make us sensitive, generous, imaginative, impartial in perceiving the tendency of our inchoate dawning activities. Kohlberg, 1958, too, underscored the cognitive foundations of morality when he proposed that moral action is oriented to or preceded by a value judgment. This distinction does not mean that moral action is motivated by pure reason, as Kant thought, but the need to see moral action as determined by reason seems to spring from the experience of moral judgments as motivating. Terrell and his colleagues, in their studies of developmental changes in moral judgment, concluded that older children form distinct, organized systems of thought, which subsequently guide the processing of information about moral and conventional actions. Features of events are processed and interpreted by individuals from the perspective of their own domain differentiated judgment. Excuse me. He concludes the substantive aspects of morality are connected with judgment, thought, and reflections. But moral judgments are not entirely rational conclusions reached through dispassionate review of all the available information. People, when making decisions, sometimes rely on simplifying cognitive heuristics that can cause them to reach erroneous conclusions, and evidence indicates that moral judgments are not immune to the biasing effects of these heuristics. What is heuristics? There's a couple of words I skipped over that I would like to know what they mean before I go on, but I'm not trying to be here for too much time. Heuristics, a rule or piece of information used in enabling problem solving or decision making. One very rough heuristic for judging an agreement would be the total savings it promises for the federal government. A rule or piece of information used in enabling problem solving or decision making. Moral judgments are also influenced to a degree by the same types of biases that influence other inferences, such as primacy effects, framing, and hindsight. Imagine, for example, people learn about a person's intentions either before or after they are told that the person acted in ways that caused harm to others. The sequencing of the information should not influence judgments, but it does. The impact of information about intentions is greater when presented after rather than before. The description of the harm that was done The impact of information about intentions is greater when presented after rather than before the description of the harm that was done. People's moral judgments are also influenced by how an action is described or how a moral choice is framed. For example, individuals respond differently when asked to consider a difficult moral choice, such as treating 100 patients with an experimental drug that will save some patients but kill others due to the treatment's severe side effects. Individuals will tend to approve the use of the drug if told it will save the lives of 80 patients, but reject the use of the drug if it will kill 20 patients. The hindsight bias also distorts people's moral inferences. For once we know if an action resulted in some negative consequences, we judge the action as less moral, even though the negative outcomes were not intended or foreseeable. Moral judgments, like other inferences about people and the things they do, are also often sustained as much by emotion as they are by the dispassionate review of all available information. Hyde's 2001 social intuitionist model of moral judgment, for example, suggests a quick emotional intuition or gut feeling often guides people's moral judgments, and that these emotional reactions may prompt them to make moral decisions that are not entirely consistent with reason. Only after the judgment is made does cognition's role become activated as a post hoc justification tool. Post hoc. Occurring or done after the event, especially with reference to the fallacious assumption that the occurrence in question has a logical relationship with the event it follows. Meaning after this, therefore because of this, where one wrongly assumes that because event B happened after event A must have caused B. Post hoc. Or judgments of our own morality are no less biased than our judgments of others. Our judgments of our own morality are no less biased than our judgments of others. People are more positive when they compare their personal qualities and accomplishments to others' qualities and accomplishments. And this self-serving bias applies equally to moral qualities. Most people believe that they are more moral than other people, and they judge themselves more leniently if they should ever stray from the proper moral path. In a demonstration of this tendency, we arranged for college students to complete various tests of social and intellectual skills in groups of 2. Unbeknown to the participants, one of the group members was part of the research team, and during the testing phase, he cheated, and in nearly all cases, convinced the participant to cheat as well. At the end of the session, participants completed the survey asking them to identify the factors that caused them to cheat. Compared to the responses of neutral observers who watched a recording of the cheating, individuals who cheated claimed their actions were unusual for them personally, but also ones that anyone would have performed in those circumstances. They claimed they were morally good people who had been pressured into acting badly. Moral judgments are influential. Moral judgments are dispositional inferences, so calling a person a liar or a hero is very different than calling that same person inept or foolish. Moral judgments identify as stable, highly personal characteristic of a person, their morality, as the cause of their behaviors. Because moral judgments locate the cause of action within the person rather than in the press of circumstance, this inference will likely have an enduring influence on perceivers' cognitive construals. If people we know seem socially reserved or awkward, we might tentatively conclude they are introverts who are uncomfortable in socially demanding circumstances. But if we discover they have lied to us and we saddle them with the label of liar, their truthfulness will be questioned retrospectively and prospectively. Those judged to be moral or immoral are seen in a unique psychological light that, once cast, is rarely dimmed. Moral judgments, then, define individuals and actions at a level more fundamental than all other perceptual pronouncements. Philosophically, moral concerns are said to override all other reasons for selecting and justifying action. An action might be expedient, healthy, lawful, or pleasurable, but if it is judged to be morally wrong, then Many normative philosophers would likely argue against engaging in the action. As Hare, 1981, explains, to treat a principle as overriding, then, is to let it always override other principles when they conflict with it, and in the same way, let it override all other prescriptions, including non-universalizable ones. Including non-universalizable ones. Psychologically, moral judgments also override other inferences when perceivers are forming impressions of other people and their actions. Individuals characterized as boastful, dull, and irritating will likely be viewed negatively by others, but this negative impression can shift to a positive one should they exhibit features associated with morality, truthfulness, ethicality, or engage in morally commendable actions. Similarly, those with any number of positive qualities, such as reliability, warmth, and good manners, may be judged quite negatively should they act in morally suspect ways or display qualities that suggest they are not ethical. Like the central traits identified by Ash in his studies of impression formation, moral judgments about an individual have a relatively larger impact on people's overall conception of a person rather than perceptual information. In consequence, moral character information powerfully determines the overall impression we form of another person with whom we have or expect to have an important or meaningful relationship. Evidence of immorality is particularly influential. Birnbaum and his colleagues, in their studies of the way perceivers combine information to form impressions of other people, discovered that a single morally reprehensible act is sufficient to garner a negative impression, even if that information is combined with more positive, complementary information about a person. Birnbaum confirmed that a person who performed such good deeds as talking a friend out of suicide, preventing a forcible rape, or rescuing a family from a burning building was rated very positively, but not if the person had also behaved immorally on one or more occasions, by torturing prisoners of war during an interrogation or selling food known to be contaminated. Even as many as 9 highly positive moral actions were not sufficient to undo the negative effects of an immoral action. From Ezekiel 3:20, when a righteous person turns from their righteousness and does evil, the righteous things that a person did will not be remembered. Morality's perceptual reach is not limited to only perceptions of other people. Appraisals of morality also substantially influence our conception of ourselves. Aquino and Reed, 2002, suggests that most people's self-conceptions are organized, at least in part, around moral qualities and characteristics. Morality is considered by most people to be one of their key personal attributes, and so their appraisals of their own morality influences their self-definition, self-esteem, and their actions across a wide range of contexts. For example, their satisfaction with themselves increases when their moral judgments of themselves are positive, but declines when they judge themselves to have acted in morally suspect ways. When individuals fail a test, lose a game, or burn the evening meal, their self-esteem drops. But should they act in an immoral way, and they cannot justify the action psychologically, their self-appraisals decline more precipitously. Precipitously. In contrast, those who believe they have acted in a moral rather than immoral way express heightened levels of happiness and a sense of purpose. The moral self is viewed as so fundamental to identity that people believed they would be the same person if, after a brain injury, they retained moral qualities but lost their distinctive personality traits such as creativity, sense of humor, and assertiveness. So I haven't said much of anything in a while uh, in all of this, but do I consider myself to be a moral or immoral person? That might be a question someone would ask. But then to question a person's morality and to judge if the act of another person is moral or immoral, that I'm raising that question in response to the question if or not I am moral or immoral. There are many matters of time and matters of fact that come into play. You know, the place that I live is a place that I did not build. I did not build this place, but my life has built up to my being here. The next subsection in chapter 1 is titled Moral Scrutiny. Humans, as a species, may be wise, Homo sapiens, but they could have easily been classified as Homo criticus, the animal that evaluates, criticizes, and judges. But only some of these judgments are moral ones. Someone who is rude, lacks good table manners, dresses badly, or roots for a team we dislike may be judged negatively, just as the person who is polite, engaging, well dressed, and roots for our favorite team may be viewed positively. But people reserve their moral approval and condemnation for only certain people and certain kinds of action. Although the line between moral judgments and their types of evaluative pronouncements is often an uncertain one, philosophical and psychological investigations have consistently identified two necessary conditions for creating a shift from judgment to moral judgment: the degree of harm or benefit produced by the action and the consistency of the action with standards that define what is considered moral. Harm. The U.S. Department of Justice once surveyed over 60,000 citizens, asking them to evaluate the severity of actions ranging from vagrancy to murder. The respondents quite reasonably rated actions that cause harm to other people or to their property most negatively. Planting a bomb in a public building that explodes and kills 20 people, murder and rape, or setting fire to a building, causing $100,000 worth of damage, were all viewed as very negative actions that were deserving of prosecution and punishment. But when asked to judge such victimless crimes as public intoxication, loitering, truancy, trespassing, and vagrancy, they were more lenient. The majority of the respondents did not consider these actions to be sufficiently aberrant to warrant punishment, for they caused no harm. Harm is central to most philosophical analysis of morality. The Hippocratic corpus, dating to the 4th century BCE, enjoined physicians to heal the sick as best they could, but first of all, do no harm to others. Both Hinduism and Buddhism embrace the principle of ahimsa, ahimsa, which roughly translate into cause no harm or injury to another. One of the leading schools of thought in philosophy of ethics, consequentialism, also suggests that morality fundamentally depends on the amount of harm that results from an action. Bentham's concept of utilitarianism, for example, is one such approach to ethics, for it argues what is good and right will be the action that maximizes the greatest good, but also minimizes harm. The virtue of beneficence, as described by Frankena, requires that a person should not inflict harm on others, should prevent evil or harm to others, and should, when possible, act to remove evil and promote good. John Stuart Mill, in his essay on liberty, proposed a morality based on the harm principle. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. Even Adam Smith, whose analysis of economic transactions assume individuals strive to maximize their personal gains and minimize their losses, recognized that these tendencies operate in tandem with another natural force, concern for the welfare of others. Studies in moral psychology further affirm the significance of harm in triggering a shift from general evaluation and appraisal to moral valuation and judgment. Gray and his colleagues, for example, suggest that moral cognition is guided by a harm-based template that organizes people's thinking about what is right and what is wrong. When they asked people to write down actions that are morally wrong, their lists were filled with extremely harmful actions: murder, adultery, child abuse. When asked to categorize these actions, the respondents described some as unfair and others as gross, but the majority, 68%, used the same word to describe them: harmful. We too confirmed the significance of harmful consequences in instigating moral review by asking participants to evaluate individuals whose actions produced consequences that ranged from the extremely beneficial to the extremely harmful. Their judgments, as consequentialists would predict, tracked the quality of consequences closely. A person who delayed others so they missed an appointment, caused a child to miss a meal, or broke someone's fishing rod was not judged as immoral, but a person whose actions caused significant harm, death, psychological damage, disfigurement, or permanent physical injury was. Conversely, acting to produce mildly positive consequences for others, such as giving someone a small gift, weeding an elderly woman's garden, or giving a young boy a free dinner, did not generate any moral approbation. But rescuing a person from a fire or drowning, searching for and finding a lost child in the wilderness, and giving a needy family $200,000 did. Harm's unique influence on people's moral judgments was further confirmed in studies of the neurological basis of moral judgment. Investigators who tracked respondents' neurological responses when making moral judgments found specific areas of the brain, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, were more active when people were asked to evaluate actions that caused substantial harm, and that actively in those sites was associated with more negative moral judgments. Evidence also suggests that people's sensitivity to harmful outcomes is mediated in part by certain neurotransmitters. When levels of serotonin are elevated, people are even more likely to condemn actions that result in harm. Moral standards. Some actions result in no discernible consequences, either positive or negative, and yet they still elicit moral condemnation. Sexual preferences, dietary predilections, religious practices, even thoughts and feelings which are never openly expressed may be considered immoral despite the utter lack of any harm resulting from these actions. This tendency to identify some actions and the individuals who perform them independently of the consequences they yield results from a second process that can instigate a moral scrutiny, conformity to rules, standards, and principles that explicitly define criteria for moral approval and reproach. All human societies identify certain actions as ones that are prohibited as morally wrong, and those individuals who violate these social rules are likely to find themselves facing moral censure. Although the content of the social standards or rules, principles, maxims, or norms varies across cultures. The process itself is universal. Individuals who act in ways that are inconsistent with prescriptive moral standards are considered to be less than moral than those who act in ways that are consistent with moral standards. A standard, according to Higgins, 1990, is a criterion or rule established by experience, desires, or authority for the measure of quantity and extent, or quality and value. Such standards have three basic features. First, they share a similar structure, which is of the general form. Actions of type X are morally bad or good and should not or should be done. Thus, these rules consist of both an evaluative component, lying to others is bad or telling the truth is good, and a prescriptive component. One should not lie or one should tell the truth. Unlike descriptive norms, expectations about what people typically do in any given situation, moral norms are injunctive. They describe what people should do, prescriptive norms, and what they should not do, proscriptive norms. Violating a descriptive norm pertaining to some commonly accepted standard for interpersonal behavior, such as smiling back when someone smiles at you, may be considered unusual, but violations of moral norms are considered wrong. Second, these rules tend to be integrated in a coherent moral framework. For example, the rules endorsed by any specific person may be derived from an overreaching religious or philosophical perspective, rather than a checklist of things that one should or should not do. They are hierarchically organized mandates for action. Third, these rules are socially shared rather than wholly private and personal. Moral standards are commonly accepted by all or nearly all members of one's own social group, and so they are transpersonal. In some instances, these moral norms are made explicit in codes of ethics, and they may also provide the basis of legal statutes that identify unlawful actions and the sanctions that will be imposed should these standards be violated. But the lists of what is considered immoral and what is considered illegal are not necessarily identical. Some actions which are legal may be viewed as morally wrong, whereas some illegal actions may be viewed in some situations as morally commendable. Just as perceivers' sensitivity to the harm and benefit is consistent with consequentialist moral philosophies, so their attentiveness to the consistency between actions and moral rules is consistent with this second major school of thought in moral philosophy, deontology. Deontologists reject consideration of consequences as a basis for moral evaluation and rely instead on universal moral rules to which no exception can be made. For example, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, generally regarded as the foremost proponent of the deontological position, maintained that all practical principles of justice must contain strict truths, since exceptions destroy the universality on account of which alone they bear the name principles. Kant argued that the universal maxim, "always keep your promises," was a command of reason that should be acted on, irrespective of the consequences. To support his position, Kant explained that if people acted on the opposite universal maxim, only only keep your promises when it is to your advantage, that principle would be negated. Promises, for example, are not actually promises if one permits exceptions. Psychologists who study moral judgment have also confirmed that many people are, at least in part, intuitive deontologists who respond negatively to actions that violate moral standards. For example, if people are asked to judge a doctor who sought to undo a greater harm, the death of 5 patients, by deliberately sacrificing a single patient, most people objected to this violation of the moral rule, thou shalt not kill, and a physician's duty to heal rather than harm. Most, too, later rejected the very idea of consequentialism, preferring instead to base their judgments on moral standards. When researchers have directly manipulated the consistency of actions with moral norms and the consequences that follow, they find that normative choices are viewed more positively than those that yield positive results. We also confirmed this tendency when we asked people to evaluate individuals who violated basic moral principles. They lied, stole, broke promises, or failed to do their duty. And those who acted in ways that were consistent with moral rules, they were truthful, resisted taking what did not belong to them, kept their promises, and did their duty. Rule breakers were consistently rated as less moral, even when the action yielded positive consequences. So there's a few more pages here, but I am not going to be able to go on. I feel like I've read about enough of this first chapter, and I want to say something about, creating content. From what I've been reading here about moral and immoral action, it isn't exactly an immoral action to be scrolling your social media or to be looking at your device or your phone. But if a person were to be scrolling their device while something bad happened, then that would seem immoral, right? Now, it could also be said that if a person were creating content while something bad was happening, that could be considered immoral. I mean, if they're aware that something bad is happening while they're creating content, it would be immoral to be creating content. But all I'm trying to say here in the end is that scrolling through content and viewing content rather than creating content and uploading it, when it comes to moral and immoral action, or I'm trying to make a comparison. I don't have a lot to explain why. It's just I'm throwing these things out after reading that. So creating content rather than consuming content. What else? And what the making of the content being original and being genuine or creative in doing so. Like, I understand I'm just reading a book that I did not write, and I'm reading words that not all the words do I know, but this is something other than what I would be doing, while not on the camera, right? While not on record. This is something completely different than what I would be doing off camera. Now, there may be things that I can do associated with this, but doing something other than what you would be doing normally. Here I go, reaching for the Bible once more. This Bible that I have read, the 1 Year Bible for Men, King James Version. Before 2024, I hadn't read the Bible, but I've read the entire Bible in 2024. I need to read it again because this entire year 2025, I've only opened it a few times. And I'd like to go through it again, which is something other than, I mean, which is to be doing something other than I would usually be doing. Is what I'm getting at. So trying something new, doing something other than we would normally, that can be considered a moral action, right? Or an act of repentance, even. But matters of time and matters of fact, we have to consider. And what do we consider obligatory? What are our obligations? Do we have a moral obligation to do the things that we do? Like, I guess, earning our income. We don't want to steal money. We don't want to bum money, but we want to earn money. We want to earn our income. We want to pay our way because that's the law. That's the way things work. We want to deserve what we earn, right? We want to deserve, earn, and that be our right as well. So there's not much more I can say, and I feel like I've read long enough some of these words I don't know, and the way the sentences go, I don't exactly know how to say, and I'm running out of breath. I'm getting tired of speaking, but that's the point. It's not to complete the entire thing, though I intended to complete the first chapter. It's not possible for me to do because I've said my own thing. I didn't completely stick to the text that I'm reading. So this is my way of saying Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Hopeful for happiness in the new year and years to come. We will see what happens. Thank you.